I understand I'm committing a cardinal sin, a huge one, by speaking with Timothy Williamson and not asking him about what is logic and what is knowledge. Everyone does that. I want to hear you expound on something that's rarely heard. What are your views on consciousness?
Well, I I think its philosophical importance has been drastically overrated. Um, I certainly don't think that it's some kind of very ontologically special level of reality, in the sense that some people think that consciousness is somehow made up of qualia, or sort of things, something like conscious sensations, which are independent of the physical. I think that in talking about consciousness, it's much better to focus on issues about being conscious of something as some form of cognition, in the sense, that, I mean, right now I'm conscious of you, for example, and I'm conscious of the microphone in front of me, and so that's just a cognitive relation to things in the environment, and I think within epistemology, consciousness has been overestimated, because there's a tendency amongst people who would classify themselves as internalists to think that really all the action in relation to, for example, the justification of beliefs and so on, has to be at the level of consciousness. Whereas it seems to me that the evidence from psychology is pushing in the direction that, in fact, most of the action is outside consciousness, and that although the consciousness as some kind of final workplace where we can deliberate about decisions and so on. I mean, there's something to that, but that we shouldn't privilege it over all the stuff all the cognition that's going on that isn't happening at the level of consciousness. Just to sum up, I do not regard consciousness as such a big deal.
And to bracket that, it's not that you don't regard consciousness as such a huge deal. You mean philosophically it's not a huge deal. Not that it's not a huge deal in people's lives.
Philosophically, yes. I mean, obviously, if somebody were to tell you or me that they're about to give us an injection which will render us unconscious for the rest of our lives, I mean, we would not be happy at all, and it would be silly to be happy about that. But I think that it's somehow been given a kind of privilege by philosophers that it doesn't deserve.
When people speak about beliefs and knowledge and understanding, those are often said to be mental states. Does a mental state presuppose consciousness?
I think it's not very obvious whether that's the case, but if we came across some animals whose behavior seemed to be much better understood by attributing, let's say, beliefs and desires to them and knowledge than in any other way, then it would be reasonable to say that they did have beliefs, even if, let's say, that some kind of investigation of their brains suggested that they didn't have anything which kind of fits the philosopher's paradigm of consciousness. I mean, of course, there's a sense in which, just by perceiving the environment, where in a way we're conscious of the environment through perception. All the time we're gaining knowledge of the environment, and if we were dealing with a creature which just wasn't conscious of anything at all in that epistemological sense, then it doesn't sound like a creature with a mind. So I think it depends on how much we model consciousness just on being conscious of something just on on perceiving things, and how much on whether we want to put a whole lot more about the special role of consciousness into it. But if we put too much into the what's required for consciousness, then it just won't be required for having mental states or having beliefs and knowledge.
So then, can an AI genuinely know facts or understand models or what have you under your account?
Well, I think of course, it's not so obvious what to say about that. I mean, irrespective of the what I've been saying, because of course some people might also say that the advanced forms of AI are conscious. I think that the forms of AI that people mostly have in mind seem rather inadequate for the attribution of mental states, because their connection to the world is so limited. That although they're ChatGPT or whatever it is producing sort of reams and reams of prose, and the words in it are do in fact refer to objects out in the environment, and the reference is completely mediated by the human use of language. I mean that they're using words which only refer. If an AI uses the word cat, that refers to cats because that's what humans mean by the word cat. It's very different from a robot which is interacting with its environment, which has some form of, as it were, sense perception, and is acting on its environment in much more extensive ways. And of course, it wouldn't be so technologically difficult to combine AI with those forms of input and output that I think have a lot to do with whether we're actually talking about genuine mental states. And I'm skeptical about whether AI in exactly its current form really deserves to count as having mental states. But I think if we're talking about AI in systems that have more autonomy and more ability to interact with the world, then I don't see any clear argument for denying them mental states. And it might be that if the best way of, let's say, of understanding a robot's behavior is by attributing knowledge and belief and desires and so on to it, then that's evidence that it really does have those mental states.
That's interesting. If the best way of us understanding something is to attribute something to it, then that's evidence that that thing has those attributes?
Yes, of course. It's not that it's up to us whether something else really has mental states. I mean that the truth of the matter depends on what's going on with that robot or maybe non-human animal or whatever it is. So it's not that we get to make it, for example, conscious or non-conscious. It's just that when we're testing the hypothesis that it has mental states, we're going to test the hypothesis by seeing whether this hypothesis gives much better explanations than any kind of alternative view of what's going on. And so if the hypothesis that it has mental states, and specifically, specific attributions of systems of knowledge and belief and desire to this entity, whatever it is, if that as it were produces the explanatory goods, then that is evidence in its favor. But it's evident. I mean, what we're talking about is how much evidence we humans have for attributing mental states to some other kind of system.
So this is interesting, because the way that I would think about a mental state or consciousness or any of those sorts of attributes is a statement about the ontology of an entity, rather than a statement about my best way of describing that entity.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with that.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
To give an example, I believe the Greeks thought that rocks wanted to be close to the earth. So it's as if they had this telos, or this purpose of going close to the earth. And we could have also conceptualized that as a want. It has a desire to be close to the earth. And I imagine that that's successful now. It's not quantitatively successful, but maybe that was good enough for them at the time. And then that gets displaced with a different model, and the model that Newtonian mechanics say doesn't have any variable called want or desire in it. So then we eliminate that. So I assume, so you just said that you're agreeing.
Yeah. I mean, so the thing is, if somebody produced let's say a theory of gravity, where gravity was actually the result of things wanting to be closer to each other, and the bigger they are, the more they wanted, or something like that.
The larger of a heart they have. Yeah.
Yes. That theory, it won't get everything wrong, but it doesn't really have the kind of explanatory power that we'd expect of attributing mental states to creatures. Because I mean, the thing about the mind is that, I mean, the whole point, from a kind of broadly evolutionary perspective of having a mind, is in order to interact in flexible ways with an environment that's very complicated and that's changing very quickly, and so on. And what we're expecting from mental state attributions is that they enable us to predict, flexible behavior, because that's what the whole point of of attributing minds is. And we wouldn't get that with rocks, and so we wouldn't really get the kind of distinctive, explanatory benefits that we'd want from attributing the mind, and the kind of thing that we might expect, for example, that they do this by in some way representing their environment. That seems just completely inappropriate for rocks. I mean, they don't have to represent the bodies that they're gravitationally attracted to, or whatever, in order to be gravitationally attracted to them.
The Economist covers math, physics, philosophy, and AI in a manner that shows how different countries perceive developments and how they impact markets. They recently published a piece on China's new neutrino detector. They cover extending life via mitochondrial transplants, creating an entirely new field of medicine. But it's also not just science. They analyze culture, they analyze finance, economics, business, international affairs across every region. I'm particularly liking their new Insider feature. It was just launched this month. It gives me a front row access to The Economist's internal editorial debates, where senior editors argue through the news with world leaders and policymakers in twice weekly long format shows. Basically, an extremely high-quality podcast. Whether it's scientific innovation or shifting global politics, The Economist provides comprehensive coverage beyond headlines. As a TOE listener, you get a special discount. head over to economist.com/TOE to subscribe. That's economist.com/TOE for your discount. Can you help me sort out in my mind the distinguishing factors between mind and mental states and consciousness? So which has another as a necessary condition and what is optional and so forth? So those are three: mind, mental states, and consciousness.
Yeah. So I think mind is just a abstract term that we apply to anything that has mental states. Right. So if you have mental states, then you have a mind, and if you don't have mental states, you don't have a mind. So I think that's relatively easy. With consciousness, I mean, not all mental states are conscious. I think that's fairly generally agreed, and in a way, that's become part of common sense. So that we might describe somebody's behavior by saying that the way they're behaving is because, let's say, that they're still angry with their mother about something, even though they're not at all aware of this. They may be angry without feeling angry, but it might still be that all kinds of otherwise somewhat irrational behavior are best understood by attributing to them an attitude of anger towards the mother of an unconscious kind, and so that's a mental state which is not conscious. And even when we're talking about what someone, for example, knows how to do, they have various skills, and the knowledge doesn't have to be conscious knowledge. And so, I mean, for example, a lot of the knowledge that somebody has when they know how to ride a bicycle it's not knowledge that is running through their consciousness as they ride a bicycle. I mean, if it were running through consciousness, they'd probably crash. But and so it's important for it not to be conscious. But it's still in fact stuff that they do know, and consciousness relations of being conscious of various things. If they're understood in the sense in which that, for example, if something is conscious to you, then you're usually able to say something about it in words or whatever. That just isn't required for mental states. It's as it were, for a particular mental state, it's an optional extra.
Can you know something without knowing that you know it, but outside of the tacit versus explicit division?
Well, this is something that I've argued that you can do. That very roughly, the argument is that in order to know things, you have to be sort of, roughly speaking, safely correct about them, and so that you're not, as it were, too close to being wrong about them. And so if you say that somebody knows something, you're just attributing one level of safety, or, as I sometimes put it, at one level of margin for error. Whereas if, in order to know that you know something, basically you need two margins for error. And so that's a more demanding state. And so, I think without worrying too much about issues of consciousness, on broadly epistemological grounds, you can argue that there's got to be a difference between knowing and knowing that I mean, I should say that those arguments of mine are quite controversial, but that's something I do argue in Knowledge and Its Limits, and other work of mine. But
is that your loneliest intellectual position, or is there another one that's even more held pretty much by you only?
It's not, that one is not a very lonely position. I think an awful lot of people agree with me about that. I mean, there are also some people, who disagree, and want to give models of knowledge which don't have that consequence. So, but yeah, I'm not feeling embattled, and that one, although I think that the arguments I gave were new ones, I didn't have the feeling that I was going to be shocking people that much by taking that line. So I would think of that as one of, as still a controversial view, but not as provocative as some of the other views that I have.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying today's episode. If you're hungry for deeper dives into physics, AI, consciousness, philosophy, along with my personal reflections, you'll find it all on my Substack. Subscribers get first access to new episodes, new posts as well, behind-the-scenes insights, and the chance to be a part of a thriving community of like-minded pilgrimers. By joining, you'll directly be supporting my work and helping keep these conversations at the cutting edge. So click the link on screen here, hit subscribe, and let's keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge together. Thank you and enjoy the show. Just so you know, if you're listening, it's CurtJaimungal.org, CurtJaimungal.org.